Their number is few, 3% of South Carolina's population. Yet their faces reflect the state's singular beauty. They have felt the bitter sting of bigotry. Yet their eyes shine with the belief that their church will forever be free. Their priest leaders are dedicated. However, they are disappointingly few. Yet their spirit is determined to lend shape to the destiny of their society. They are the Catholics of South Carolina, a community of faith driven by hope and inspired by a justice sown in peace. In their hearts is a confident assurance, a faith as rare and strong and unwavering as fire-tried gold.
April 19th, 1842. I venture to apprise you of the death of our beloved bishop. Never was there such excitement in the city of Charleston. Never will there be such again. The whole Union is this moment ringing with expressions of regret at what they term a national calamity. In the city on that morning, all was uproar. The bells, as day broke, tolled out what all expected, the notes of his demise.
The death of Bishop John England in April of 1842 brought the city of Charleston to a stunned halt.
Business was suspended. The shipping in the harbor hung their flags at half-mast, and at once the minute guns boomed in their awful tone the death of a great man.
Who was Bishop John England?
Bishop England was one of the most exciting ecclesial figures, in my view, in the whole American church history scene.
To my mind, he was the outstanding bishop in the United States at his time. Great admiration for him because he was a pioneer. He was a very, very colorful person, a great orator.
John England was born in 1786 in Cork, Ireland. He had been a gifted student at St. Patrick's College in Carlow.
In spite of the public perception of the students of those days as the poor Irish, they were in fact the Catholic gentry.
At age 22, England was ordained a Roman Catholic priest in the Cork Cathedral. After his ordination, he became a leader among the Irish clergy.
John England was a good orator. He had to be. It was the age of oratory. It was the age of controversy. It was the age of debate. There were public debates in Ireland. There were debates about politics. There were debates about religion. His training as a barrister in Cork stood him in good stead.
In the summer of 1820, John England received an order from the Vatican that would forever change his life.
July the 12th, 1820.
He was being sent to the United States of America.
I have had letters from Rome informing me that South Carolina has been formed into a bishopric, and that I have been appointed a bishop thereof.
Revolution and freedom, liberté, égalité, this was in the air. This was what every Irishman aspired to. Curiously, America offered a space in which these noble aspirations could be realized in a way in which they couldn't be, he thought, anywhere else.
In 1820, when John England took possession of the newly formed Diocese of Charleston, the Catholic Church in America was just 30 years old.
Here's this person from Cork arriving here with this universal sense of church, a sense that the church has a message for a new culture and a new people.
England's diocese was huge. At that point in history, it not only included South Carolina, but the states of Georgia and North Carolina as well. England faced other problems. His new church had few priests. His small flock was scattered, and Catholics were not at all welcomed. England, however, was not disheartened.
He saw here that in freedom of religion and separation of church and state, the Catholics had a real chance to practice their religion and to advance.
It was only a short time after he arrived that England began convincing South Carolinians that Catholics made good neighbors.
He set out to try to indicate to the people of America that there was no incompatibility between the Catholic faith and the Constitution of the United States. In fact, he loved the Constitution of the United States.
The power of John England's life came from his steadfast belief in the people of his diocese. He attached himself profoundly to the principles of democracy and showed a generous tolerance of all who differed with him in both politics and religion. Nowhere was England's message of tolerance better evidenced than in his passionate defense of Catholicism in the pulpits of Protestant churches throughout the South.
For myself, I have no more doubt than I have for my existence, which is the true religion. But I am not to say that that is equally clear to another mind. Another may conscientiously feel it impossible to believe with me. That is the spirit of toleration which must exist in a society like ours. It is the duty of charity which we owe to each other. Religious differences must not separate our fellow citizens.
If only the Pope had sent somebody like Bishop England to see Martin Luther, we wouldn't have a Protestant church in the world today. And if Cardinal Wolsey had had some of Bishop England's skills, perhaps we wouldn't have a Church of England.
Bishop England's tolerance was essential to his belief in freedom for religion.
Charleston is interesting because it had always been a place that revered religious freedom.
One of the things that you should know about South Carolina that I find so fascinating, we were literally a haven for differing religious opinions.
It's an oddity. It was in the early Constitution of the Carolinas. It was actually written in to ensure that Jews could practice their faith here.
There was a great spirit of independence that was sweeping America at that time. Democracy was in vogue, and we had just gone through a revolution that separated us from Europe. And the Pope had the clear insight to send a wonderful man to his Catholics in Charleston.
The freedom that England embraced so completely helped him realize the importance of the press.
Bishop England was very adept at defending positions, and in terms of controversy, he was quick to use the print medium to discuss issues.
Almost every division of Christians here has its own peculiar publication for the exposition of its doctrines, the communication of facts.
The newspapers and all print media were really the mode of communication. If you didn't have an audience to whom you were speaking directly, the only other way to get your word out was through the print.
To supply this want, the miscellany is intended.
Bishop England loved the miscellany, but that was only one way he used the printed word to reach the people. Days after arriving in America, he published a pastoral letter. In 1821, he issued the first English catechism. He also published an English missal for the use of lay people attending Mass, which at that time was celebrated in Latin.
I think if you look at some of the old religious periodicals, you'll see that there's a lot of interest in theology, biblical scholarship, and anyone learned had a place in an intellectual society.
From his position as an intellectual in the developing American society, England was asked to speak before the United States Congress. There, he forcefully articulated his views on harmonizing Catholic principles and the constitutional bases of the American government.
Your Constitution says that Congress shall have no power to restrict the free exercise of religion. Suppose your dignified body tomorrow attempted to deny me that right. Though the law, as it would be called, should pass through your two houses, obtain a signature from the President, I would not obey it. For it would be no law, it would be a usurpation. For you cannot make a law in violation of the Constitution. You have no power in such a case.
I think it is accurate to consider England as one of the first Catholic clerics and bishops to appreciate American democracy and to connect it with the Catholic faith. He was one of the first to see that democracy and Catholicism could travel the same road.
Oratory alone could not deal with the pastoral problems England faced daily. Epidemics were rampant in Charleston, and the fevers spawned a large population of orphans. Schooling for young women and blacks was almost unheard of.
Bishop England needed help, and so he met women, 4 women in Baltimore in 1829 who agreed to come to Charleston to form a religious congregation under his direction in late November 1829.
Bishop England had not only the vision, but the practical capacity to bring it about. The understanding that there was this tremendous well of human resource in the diocese, in the Catholic women.
It was the threefold mission of Sisters of Charity: education, care of orphans, the sick, poor, mostly in their homes in those days, and also he wanted us to play a part in the education of the black population.
Amy.
Today, large numbers of lay people continue the work of the Sisters of Charity of Our Lady of Mercy.
Teaching is not a job, it's definitely a ministry, it's a calling.
I went to Catholic school for part of my own childhood and just felt accepted and loved there, and I guess I wanted to be a part of that in my professional life. I hope there's a mission in it, reaching the kids any way possible, certainly through what they read, the choices that they're making.
In 1989, when Bishop Thompson was appointed and named as our bishop, he came here with the idea of improving the school system, and he set out 4 criteria that he wanted the Diocese of Charleston schools to have. He wanted the schools to be authentically Catholic, financially stable, academically excellent, and to be accepted by the community.
The newly formed Charleston Catholic School is a bold experiment that meets Bishop Thompson's criteria.
This school started as the result of other schools merging.
Because of changing demographics, 3 Catholic schools in the city of Charleston closed their doors. At the heart of the city, the church staked its reputation for fairness on the fact that it could produce a racially balanced school.
It was clear that this was going to be the first real attempt to bridge the races in downtown Charleston in a private setting.
And it was kind of risky, and I think everybody felt that it was a little bit of a factor to send their children here at the initial stages.
I'll be honest, I didn't know what to expect, but I could not be more pleased and more proud to have the kids there. They go there because it's a good school, but also because I can see the young leaders of the future who don't have issues of race brewing inside of them being taught there.
But beyond that, what you will see in your child's eye is a sparkle, a spirit.
It has been said that the eyes are the windows of the soul. Peering into the eyes of the young John England, there is promise, vitality, and vision.
And then there's a portrait 20 years later. And you get the impression that this man poured out absolutely everything that he had, and it took its toll. When you're talking about a man of the church, a person of the church, a woman of the church, you like to think that you're going to see some of that journey in their eyes, in their face. And I think you do see it in Bishop England's.
Bishop John England died on April 11th, 1842. He was 56. No religious leader of his time watched more jealously over the preservation of the ideals upon which the American Republic was built. And no bishop worked harder to build a free church in a free society. The defining historical crisis for the American South was the Civil War. Clothed in the rhetoric of biblical prophecy and national destiny, the war initiated a profound social revolution.
In December 1860, about 150 men got together at a secession convention, and they wrote a document that they called the Ordinance of Secession, which was like a Declaration of Independence.
When the ink dried on that document, South Carolina and all the states that became the Confederacy were drawn inexorably toward the vortex that would destroy their economy, their politics, and the way of life made possible by slavery.
A lot of people say the Civil War was not fought over slavery. It was fought over states' rights. But if you look at what the people in South Carolina did when they seceded, they wrote a document which listed the reasons why the state seceded from the Union. And in that document, they say, quite explicitly, the northern states are not enforcing the fugitive slave law. The northern states are trying to prohibit us from expanding slavery into the western territories. And the northern states want to abolish slavery from our land. And this is why we're seceding from the Union. So it's quite plain from the mouths of the rebels themselves that the Confederacy was established as an attempt to propagate and perpetuate slavery.
Pope Gregory XVI had condemned slavery in an encyclical issued on December 3, 1839. But Roman Catholic bishops in the South chose to interpret the Pope's words to mean that the institution of slavery was in itself morally justifiable. Trading slaves or mistreating them was, in their interpretation, what was morally unconscionable. And Bishop Patrick Lynch of Charleston was no exception.
I believe it's important to bear in mind that Patrick Lynch, although born in Ireland, was brought up in South Carolina. He was brought up in a society where slaveholding was part of the established order. He was brought up in a slave-owning family. And I think that at the time that the war broke out, at the time of the attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861, he was himself legally the owner of nearly 100 slaves.
Slavery was rampant here in South Carolina, and the bishops owned slaves at that time. It was a matter of culture. The teachings of our faith were quite clear on that, but the culture was quite different.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Bishop Lynch was a supporter of the Southern cause, of Southern states' rights. And when the break with the Union came, he very quickly enunciated his allegiance to the new independent state of South Carolina, and then a few months later to the Confederacy.
On December 26, 1860, the South Carolina militia took over Castle Pinckney, the first overt act of the Civil War. Bishop Lynch offered Mass for the Confederate soldiers at the post on New Year's Day of 1861, just a few short months before the attack on Fort Sumter.
I think that the war gave Catholics the opportunity to prove themselves to be integrally a part of the society. Catholics in the South almost without exception, supported the Confederate cause wholeheartedly.
So wholehearted was Bishop Lynch's commitment to the Confederacy that he was sent to the Vatican by Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States. His official title was Special Commissioner of the Confederate States of America to the States of the Church. The Vatican, however, saw Bishop Lynch quite differently.
He was received not as the representative of the Confederacy, but as a Catholic bishop of the United States on his ad limina visit. The Holy Father at that time gave him a set of vestments and told him to go home.
Probably the most important thing that Bishop Lynch did while diplomatic envoy to the Holy See was to publish the pamphlet describing the institution of slavery in the Confederate States. He presented slavery as a reasonable, working, and successful institution that not only supported the economy, but supported the lives of whites and blacks. He saw the institution as one that had to be run on the basis of strong moral principles, principles of fairness, principles of kindness, and he was strongly opposed to the mistreatment of slaves, strongly opposed to neglect of their physical, spiritual well-being.
When the cannons were silenced and the Civil War smoke cleared, Bishop Patrick Lynch was a man without a country.
It was only through diplomacy that Bishop Patrick Lynch was returned.
It took months to obtain a pardon from President Andrew Johnson, but eventually this was done, and he was able to come back to the United States. His diocese was in tatters.
I cannot hope that in the few years that remain to me, I can do much towards restoring what it took my venerable predecessors and myself 40 years to accomplish. Did I not put my trust in God, I should shrink in despair before the labor.
Bishop Lynch was to spend the remainder of his life, from the time he got back to Charleston around Christmas 1865, really right up until his death in 1882, in a constant effort to raise funds, to beg for money, to rebuild, to look after the needs of the poor, of orphans, of children who needed schooling. His charity and his concerns embraced both black and white Catholics after the war.
Gradually, people have come to see slavery is not the gospel. But look at the history of Western thought. Alfred North Whitehead said the same thing. One of the great adventures of ideas, to quote his book, is that it took all this time for the Christian gospel to deal with slavery. But it did.
At a time when the South was numb and ashen from the war, slavery bedeviled the churches. It also made it difficult to adjust the social structures between blacks and whites.
4 million slaves had been emancipated in 1865, and the South, white Southerners and black Southerners and even Northerners, were trying to redefine a whole range of social and economic and political relations.
Exhausted land, exhausted people, institutions that had been in place suddenly gone.
Questions about social relations, and this whole hot issue, and it was a very hot issue then, of social equality, and white Southerners were just horrified to even think that black Southerners might congregate with them on the streets or live in their neighborhoods or live and act as white people lived and act.
And everyone scrabbling to find some kind of rootedness, everyone, and no help, and no ideas.
Southerners of all colors and classes were trying to regain some kind of economic independence or some kind of economic stability. It's a very unpleasant period for the South. It's a period that left a lot of scars. It left problems that we're still dealing with today.
That was kind of low, okay?
The scars are being healed and the problem solved by men and women who believe that every human being, regardless of race or creed, should have the God-given opportunity to flourish.
We're the sisters. We're the Catholic sisters. And our last names, forget it. Nobody knows our last names. Chizupka and Jeji's, forget it. But, and that's okay. We represent the Catholic Church, and that's the way we like it.
When the Bishop of Charleston invited the Felician Sisters to establish a mission in Williamsburg County, he was following the church's long tradition of bringing justice and development to the poor. Williamsburg County is one of the poorest in the United States. In 1997, the per capita income for people in the county was $13,734. The national average was $25,000.
Williamsburg County has always been known for its racial problems, the black and the white. And I guess when we came here, we knew we had to address that somehow.
They started off with just a small building down the street, a little tin building. Just give out clothes or sell clothes for 10 cents for a suit of clothes.
We always wanted to live and work among the people we serve, preferably in a poor area that was economically deprived.
If you didn't have the dime, they never give it to you.
You can't live in isolation in this neighborhood and try to have change take place. You know, we knew change had to come from what we call the other side of the track. But we've tried to make this neighborhood, at least our part of the neighborhood, a safe environment where the children feel safe and they don't have to worry about the drug dealers or violence or any of those things.
It makes me feel good to know that they are here. It's just a peaceful atmosphere. Anything they can do for you, they will do. And that's why we love them so much.
We feel we came to dwell among these people and be part of their lives and walk day to day their journey with them, because that's what Christ mandates.
Shortly after the Civil War, in 1868, almost all white Carolinians began to withdraw from public life, politically and socially. Their intent was to recreate the world of antebellum South Carolina, a world in which they held sway. Bishop Lynch presided over the Diocese of Charleston during a portion of this troubling period. He was succeeded by Henry Northrup, who became the fourth Bishop of Charleston in 1883. Bishop Northrup was the first native-born Charlestonian to lead the diocese. Shortly after Bishop Northrup began serving the people of South Carolina, Charleston was devastated by an earthquake. The earthquake was another punch to the body of a broken society. Like every Southern institution, the Catholic Church was raising itself slowly from the ashes of the Civil War. New parish churches were constructed, the present cathedral was completed, and the cathedral school was opened in 1887. It was during those same years that Jim Crow laws went into effect.
Laws went on the books that mandated segregated facilities, separate balconies and theaters, or separate schools, or separate drinking fountains. Lunch counters were unavailable to African Americans, or only a separate place.
Jim Crow segregation was the systematic physical separation of black Southerners from white Southerners. It was a system that we like to talk about, as separate but equal.
So you had in the South this very bad and odd situation where human beings were forced in many activities to be separated, but then in other activities where they lived near each other. But the Jim Crow laws had this artificial legal requirement of separation.
Because he served longer than any bishop of Charleston, Bishop Northrup lived through the rise of Jim Crow. The ramifications of those laws would plague his successors for years. And when he died in 1916, the United States was in the midst of the war that began the changes that led to the New South. The nation emerged from World War I, ruthless and bourgeois. Wearied by idealism and disillusioned about the war to end all wars, Americans dedicated themselves with unabashed enthusiasm to making and spending money. It was a time of taller buildings, longer roads, and colossal machinery that seemed almost overnight to change farmers into factory workers. Never before had America been so materialistic and ruled by the ideals of the marketplace. If the wealth was unevenly distributed, there still seemed to be more than enough to go around. But recovery did not come easily to South Carolina.
Sherman's March is not just a Hollywood dream or fiction. It really did happen. I mean, there was a 60-mile swath of destruction that went through this state, and it wasn't just the big planters who suffered. If some poor upcountry farmer happened to be the way his homestead got burned, too. And so the loss of everything from pigs and chickens to houses and barns, that's in addition to the loss of the capital. You lose your capital wealth, how's it can be replaced? And it took this state nearly a century to create a new capital base.
The money flowed with a speculation more frenzied than at any time in history. But before there was enough new capital to resuscitate the South, a depression came with outrageous abruptness.
There was boom times for agriculture and textiles, and then the economy collapsed in South Carolina in the 1920s. Agriculture first, followed then by textiles. So when the Depression actually officially hit in 1929, this state was already on the ropes.
Among other tragedies, the ruined economy bred a misguided hostility. Brother against sister, sister against brother, church against church.
It is almost impossible for us today to picture how intense inter-church, interdenominational conflict was in the 19th century.
The seeds of this intolerance had been planted decades before. But with the Depression, they sprouted in a strange and terrifying form.
The roots of human bigotry are probably locked into the secrets of how humans got created or evolved. We are frightened. We are disturbed by who the other is. We want security. We want an identity. And so we tend to use someone else as a negative reference to boost ourselves.
The Roman Catholic minority, with its ties to a foreign state, the Vatican, was a convenient target.
South Carolina has a long tradition of I don't want to say anti-Catholicism, but beginning in the 17th century, Roman Catholics were forbidden to settle in South Carolina. In fact, freedom to worship didn't come until our 1790 Constitution. For everyone else could. Jews were permitted, any Protestant denomination, but Roman Catholics were not permitted. And this goes back to the old church-state tensions in the mother country in England. And then, of course, in the 19th century, you've got the rise of the Know-Nothing Party, anti-immigrant feelings, and Charleston was just like any other major American city trying to deal with these tensions, and they identified the outsiders as Catholics.
Despite widespread hostility, Roman Catholics in South Carolina began courageous outreach programs in rural areas.
I came down here to teach religion, to help the poor. The people were here so poor, a lot of them couldn't go to school because of the poverty.
Florence Marie Castor is one Catholic who devoted her life to assisting the poor, the lost, and the lonely in South Carolina.
For the longest time, I couldn't understand anybody. They couldn't understand me, and I couldn't understand them, whites or blacks. It was a different language. They spoke different.
Because of people like Florence Castor, Catholicism began to spring new roots, but those roots were vulnerable in the rocky soil of Southern segregation.
To expect the black people to walk over the threshold into a white man's church, no, that would never happen.
The Catholics in rural South Carolina came up with a unique solution.
Father Walsh came in with his chapel on wheels. We'd hook up with a store, and that was the purpose for the people to go through the chapel to see what a Catholic church looked like. By building these little chapels out in the country, it brought them over the threshold into the church, gave them the courage. And then once getting the courage, then they can come into the church.
Florence Castor knows the reason she devoted her life to helping others.
I think it has to be a direct call from God. The black people didn't know anything about Catholic teaching, and it was my desire and ambition that this gift can be shared with my black brothers and sisters.
In telling the story of the Catholic Church in South Carolina, historians will emphasize the zeal of a John England and the rebelliousness of Patrick Lynch. But for many years, the Church of South Carolina was guided by thoughtful and thorough bishops, quiet leaders in quiet times.
And he'd come to our house every Sunday for dinner. And it was a regular thing.
Dr. Patricia Carter was the first female physician in Charleston. She also served as the city's first female hospital chief of staff. Dr. Carter's family would often dine with the bishops of Charleston, including Bishop William Russell, a native of Maryland.
And he would talk, and he would talk. And then he would want my mother to play the piano for him so he could sing Maryland, My Maryland.
Like many of Charleston's bishops in the early 20th century, William Russell presided over a South Carolina asleep and dormant. Parishes continued to be established to deal with the trickle of Northerners to the south. Religious communities of men and women came to the local church in South Carolina to teach in schools and to shore up the numbers of local clergy. Mepkin Abbey was founded.
South Carolina was really, at least White Carolina, was really a people at peace with their past. They didn't think anything would change. They didn't know that that past was already being undermined by the New Deal, and the war would certainly change it.
World War II was the most destructive conflict in human history. When it was over, the nations that had been defeated were those that had renounced human values. Triumph went to the brave, who cherished the dignity and promise of humankind. World War II was also the catalyst which transformed the state of South Carolina forever.
The state began to rebound through the introduction of the military presence.
So this federal presence continued after the war with military bases, and then you get legislation, civil rights legislation coming in the 60s. But you also have, parallel to that, economic development. So federal laws, businessmen, and folks who just thought, look, we've really got to make a change because a society is only as strong as its weakest link. If you don't educate people, if you don't give them opportunities, we're all going to suffer.
Dollars and cents, political reality, and new laws were the underpinning of changes that led to desegregation. A long series of Supreme Court decisions finally disposed of the last remnants of the separate but equal fiction. The long-ignored guarantees of equality were now backed up by the reality of the law. But the strongest push for equality came from the people themselves. Inspired by great leaders like the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., citizens seized leadership of the crusade for equal rights.
There were Catholic bishops, there were priests, there were Protestant ministers who at great risk to their own security and their own churchly prosperity spoke out.
The church leaders in South Carolina in the 60s, all of them, particularly the mainline denominations, took a very active role in desegregation.
Practically everything that touches race relations is ultimately a moral issue. And because it is a moral issue, the church must take its position and interpret to the people and to society in general the application of these moral principles to the interracial area.
Bishop Ernest Unterkeffler, the 10th Bishop of Charleston, marched arm in arm with the freedom fighters. He was equally scorned and praised.
So when he came, he said, okay, the schools are going to be integrated and everything, and we're going to do it right away. He led the Poor People's March into Charleston. The Poor People's March, the first thing that the SCLC was involved in after Martin Luther King was killed. He met them outside of Charleston and walked with them into the city.
100 years after their emancipation, African Americans in South Carolina could finally see the beginning of an end to the ceaseless indignities they had suffered. The cultural shock of desegregation to South Carolina was as dramatic as the hailstorm of change the Second Vatican Council rained on Catholicism.
The Second Vatican Council was concurrent with the peak of the civil rights movement in America in 1962 to 65. In the religious world, the Second Vatican Council is probably the top single event of the 20th century in all religion.
Joseph Cardinal Bernardine was a champion of the Second Vatican Council. He was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina.
He had always wanted to be a doctor, and I heard Joe tell Mother that he had changed his mind and he wanted to go to become a priest.
Joseph Bernardine never regretted his change of mind. He served the Diocese of Charleston for 14 years. His thorough, thoughtful, and pastoral work caught the eye of Bishop Hallinan. Hallinan was Bishop of Charleston from 1958 to 1962. He was the first Bishop of Charleston to call for desegregation of all schools in South Carolina. His call went unanswered. Shortly after Hallinan was appointed Archbishop of Atlanta, he brought Bernardine with him as an auxiliary bishop. Joseph Bernardine had taken another step in the hierarchy that would eventually lead to being named a cardinal, an advisor to popes.
I think Joseph Bernardine, coming up out of South Carolina, out of its roots, knew very well what it was to be in a minority, seems to have been gifted from childhood with an ability to appreciate others.
His simplicity was, to my mind, his attractiveness and his goodness. He was so very, very good. And everybody was attracted to him because he was so kind and understanding and gentle.
We in the Chicago press like to kid and say he never met a camera he didn't like, which was a way of saying that he knew how to use it for his evangelical purposes, and did with great integrity.
I would say that his great gift, besides his simplicity, was his ability to convene people and to bring them together, to help them work together.
We could say that he was a man who came, who saw, and who was conquered by the needs of the people that he met.
Joseph Cardinal Bernardine was a native of Columbia, South Carolina. It is not surprising then that Pope John Paul II, in his pastoral visit to the United States in 1987, chose Columbia as the place to highlight the church's concerns about other Christian churches.
I have come to Columbia to take part in ecumenical dialogue with national leaders of other Christian churches and ecclesial communities, and to join with a large gathering of our brothers and sisters in an ecumenical prayer service. Our Lord prayed that all may be one. We all want to do our part to make this unity come about.
He was so impressed with what happened in Columbia because he said in Europe this still couldn't happen. The bringing together of the Orthodox and all of these different religious Christian communities to sit down and pray together and just talk together.
The Second Vatican Council had paved the way for ecumenical activity. Almost overnight, Catholic and Protestant clergy spoke to one another frequently and cordially. A bigotry that had once torn the fiber of Christian life in South Carolina was diminishing there and around the world.
All of this had an impact, and I would just say that the Protestant ecumenical movement, up until 1958, the election of John the 23rd, until that day when he called the council, I don't think I ever expected in my life to be praying with Catholics and being close to them and sharing marriage services with them.
The Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church of God are the fastest growing churches in South Carolina. Even though mainline churches are losing membership nationally, the Episcopal and Methodist churches are growing in the state.
This is my body, which will be given up for you.
But the growth of churches and the better relations among them did not always mean an easing of racial tensions. And other issues such as women's rights were equally perplexing to Carolinians. South Carolina was one of 15 states that never ratified the National Amendment on Equal Rights for Women. Nonetheless, in 1990, 56% of South Carolina women were employed outside the home.
When I asked the Dean of Medicine, what subject should I take? He said, you know, young lady, we don't like women in medicine. I said, what? I said, I can understand that because I don't see very many around here.
I've lived through a lot of changes, and I've lived with the burden of being a barrier breaker, and I'm proud of my role. I'm also the first Roman Catholic to ever serve on South Carolina Supreme Court and the first Catholic to ever head our court system, and I'm as proud of that as I am the first for my gender.
Despite the tensions, South Carolina continued to grow and change. In the early 60s, South Carolina attracted 40% of the annual industrial development from overseas. That growth continues today. An economy fueled by national prosperity, tourism, and industrialization has given new shape to the state.
People are now enjoying economic prosperity here, and they're rethinking their whole process in a way that's different from the Northeast or the Southwest. New things can happen as this society comes into its own once again. I think it's very exciting to be the church in South Carolina at this time.
In the midst of amazing growth, the state welcomed a new Catholic leader, Bishop David Thompson. Among his first acts, Bishop Thompson ordered that a synod take place.
The synod is a meeting called by a bishop to discuss and to debate or discern issues in his diocese.
And a synod is, for our purposes, a mini Vatican Council. We all know that the Vatican Council was a sitting down of the bishops with the Holy Father and discussion for 4 years about the life of the church throughout the world. We did that in South Carolina with the Synod of Charleston.
All of the various areas of the church are invited to take part in this coming together, to plan, to rehearse the future, so to speak, to gather our resources to see what's available, what's not available, where are the weak links in our evangelization.
Just as Bishop England had listened carefully to his church and grew it along the lines of their recommendations, so did Bishop Thompson.
The entire conference is seeing all of the Catholic population in South Carolina come together and work toward this one goal was something that I don't know if Bishop Thompson could foresee, but it was a moving experience. To me, the most personal, rewarding thing were the people that I met.
I think the most important thing that it did was to call people across the diocese to define their faith and to claim ownership of their church. They're out there, they're faithful, they believe, but this gave them an opportunity to publicly express themselves, to discuss their faith in their church, and to really walk away feeling like it was theirs when they finished.
We also have to be active in facing the social issues of our day, whether it's poverty, whether it's peace and justice issues, and be courageous enough to ask the hard questions, be courageous enough to debate them, and when appropriate, step forward and take a position. Rushed him, and we were tussling with the loaded gun. Then he jerked the gun.
South Carolina Catholics continue to take their place in the public square. Encouraged by the synod that came to a close in 1995, they realized that the synod has empowered them to act with and for their church in ways that were seldom open to them previously.
The synod is never finished. I would think the main thing in carrying out the synod in parishes now is the empowerment of the lay people, the non-ordained.
I see, particularly with the shortage of priests, that we have to count more and more heavily upon them. And I really see the laity in this diocese as rejoicing at the opportunity
Lay people are now assuming many of the tasks that were once the exclusive domain of the clergy in the Church at Charleston. Laity exercise ministries as lectors, cantors, and Eucharistic ministers.
You know, we can do our job and help the church by using our talents that we have in the private or public sector and bring that to the church and share those talents and skills. So that's where I think the church has great resources that they can draw from in the parishes, and it's very important that all of us try and support the church in ways that we have experience and background and training.
They serve as pastoral associates, directors of religious education, and school principals.
I've always been attracted to Catholic education because of the way that we can take our faith beliefs and interweave them with the academics that we teach the children. Once a teacher closes the door in her classroom, she has amazing control and amazing ability to affect the lives of children.
They are ministers for human services or peace and justice programs. They are diocesan department heads.
Catholics are now aware that they have a greater role to play in evangelizing other people, to calling people not just to Christianity, but to their own faith.
This is who we are. We are visible, not just to everybody else, but most importantly to ourselves. And so many new programs have come out of the mandates of the Synod, but they've had a tremendous oiling, lubricating effect on the whole mechanism of the church here in South Carolina. Just take a few examples. The Institute for Parish Leadership, brilliant idea that has worked out extremely well, empowering people not just to do ministry, but to get a theological education, to really be church that they hope to be.
In late 1999, Pope John Paul II once again touched the soul of the Catholic Church in Charleston by entrusting it to a new leader, Bishop Robert Baker.
My responsibility is to everyone within the confines of this diocese, the poor, the needy, the unchurched, those with any kind of problems, they become my concerns and my problems too, because they are the Lord's concerns.
The Catholic Church at Charleston was blessed with an enlightened beginning under Bishop John England. It survived the destructive force of a civil war and has undergone a long and painful rebirth. Today, it stands poised for change while aggressively clinging to its fundamental need for community.
As I look at the people in the Diocese of Charleston, I'm very proud of them because they are very proud of their church. Our church is highly respected here in South Carolina because of all the difficulties and challenges our people have met here in the South. They have every reason to be proud of their church, and they want to see it grow.
Our churches are exploding wonderfully. We are drawing so many young people, families, people of various backgrounds and ages and needs.
I just love what I find in the new church. It's such hope. It's such welcoming. And it's such downright goodness of people.
The Catholics of South Carolina are fire-tried gold. Strong, diverse, malleable. At the heart of a state known for its beauty stands the oak, roots deeply entrenched in Carolina soil. The Catholic Church is another oak, entrenched, strong, graced. Its place in South Carolina as abiding and necessary as any oak that thrives on the land.